Hello. We're now entering part 2 of Van Gogh's Iris, and I just wanted to talk a little bit more about his work. He his color expressed his emotions as he responded to the world. His insistence on color's expressive possibilities led him to develop a corresponding expressiveness in applying pigment. His brushstrokes of thick, opaque paint almost seemed drawn. His often violently interacting colors and forms and strong expressive line influenced nearly every artistic movement that came after him: symbolism, fauvism, and expressionism, and beyond. So he with this project today, we're going to finish up. You're going to need your watercolors, and we're going to finish painting our iris, and then we're going to start working on the background. So I just wanted to show you some examples. This is one of his paintings, and you can notice the thick expressive lines that give the whole painting movement when you observe. And you can notice how the colors are so vibrant, and the lines are thick and really kind of create some interesting background. So, and then this is just another example I found of the iris. So what we're going to do is we're going to paint our iris today and start working on our background. And you'll notice that there are some lovely shades of blue, almost like a purplish blue, and then the stems and leaves have like a combination of light and dark green. So I'm just going to move that to the side. And what you'll need is some fresh water, and you'll need a watercolor brush, a rag that you can reuse and wash, and we're also going to be needing some oil pastels. Now this is a smaller box that I found that I had, and this is 36 colors as opposed to the 50 that I showed you last week. And I just want to show you another of his iris paintings. And again, the flow of the lines, the brilliant color, and just the magnificent brush strokes that he used in his paintings just were magnificent. So let's get started. We're going to be painting the rest of our iris and then working in oil pastels. So we're going to start with kind of a nice darkish blue, and we're going to be painting in, and make sure that your watercolor isn't, sorry for that, is not too wet, and that you're staying within the lines. So hopefully that's the last of the phone ringing. Sorry. Okay, so just using the tip of the brush, don't smash the brush when you're painting, and we're just applying the color to our iris before we start with the oil pastels. And you can go from light and darker blue and this one's a little bit darker. We're leaving that V section in the center. Let's finish up the rest of our iris before we switch to the leaves. It's always a good idea to use the color you're using until you switch colors altogether and not go back and forth. And also, while it's still wet, I'm going to add a tiny bit of purple. Make sure your brush is nice and clean. And you want the purple to be just gradually going into your blue. Best to do it while it's still pretty wet. I know I said stick to one color, but while this is still pretty wet, it's a good idea to then bring in your purple. Now that's too wet, so when it gets too wet, simply dab your brush onto your napkin or your towel, and then absorb it. As you can see, I'm just pulling it up with my brush when it gets a little too wet. I'm going to bring in a little bit of purple. Make sure your brush is clean. Nice combination. If it gets too wet, just dab it up with your brush. Okay, we also have the bloom that we've got down here on the corner. If it's too wet, dab it up. Okay, and then the last part here is we're going to be adding some orange to this area. Okay, now when you're working in the leaves, you're never going to see leaves just be one color green. You'll notice that they're light and dark green. So if you only have a limited palette, you can do your mixing on the side of the palette with yellow. So you can make like a yellow green, or blue, make like a blue green. And the more water you add to your brush and your paint, the lighter the color. So when you kind of limit the amount of water, you'll have a much darker color. And you can go in with some lighter green. Now another reason you don't want it too wet is because we're going to be letting this dry and then use our oil pastels over it. We may have to stretch this into 1 more week just so that we'll have a really nice piece and that it will dry properly. We'll just wait on the time, see how it goes. As you can see, I'm not holding my brush too close to the silver ferrule. And I'm adding slightly different green onto my leaf. And as you're working, it's quite okay to move your painting in different directions so that you get easy access. I'm getting that a little too wet. I just want to bring in some more solid color. And I'm going back and forth with light and darker green on my leaf. Hold your brush straight up so that you have easier access to keep it inside your space that you're working in. As you can see, I just went in while that was still rather wet with my lighter green, and you see how nicely they blend in with each other when I did that. The thing with watercolor is working rather quickly, but taking your time, if that makes any sense. You want to be able to blend in your colors while they're still relatively wet so that it has more of a natural effect. And doesn't look, you don't see any hard edges in the color. Okay, now that we're done with the painting of the stem and the leaves, rinse your brush properly. And we're going to be using oil pastels, and we're going to start with the background because of the paint drying on our on our iris. So I'm gonna pull this back up. Now you'll notice in the background that there are lots of greens mixed in with yellow, an addition of some white strokes, even looks like some black strokes in here. So we're going to just pull out some slightly darker oil pastel colors. And I've chosen this kind of mustard color here and this kind of sienna. And we're going to, and you don't want to be able to lose the color. Let's see, I gotta move this over, I think. And remember, his strokes were kind of like thick dash lines. So as you can see, I'm starting to add, and the color is slightly darker. So you'll still see the lighter colors showing through, and I'm doing some thick dash lines to create a painterly picture. So it looks like it's paint, but we're in fact using oil pastel. And as you can see, this is already starting to dry, which is exactly what we want. So that's why we're working on the background right now. And I'm going to add these strokes throughout. And you can make your strokes kind of go in slightly different movement as you're adding them. It doesn't all have to be straight lines. You can kind of follow the direction of the flower, and already you're starting to see some progress here. So I'm going to add this color throughout my background, allowing my lighter yellow to show through, and that's what I want. And in doing this, it's a little bit easier so that you so you can make sure you don't see any white showing through. And with one hand, you'll need to hold down your paper so that it doesn't scrunch up. And then you can continue to turn your paper as you're working. So my suggestion is you finish your background first and then start working on your iris and then your leaves and stem. So nice thick impasto lines, very thick lines of what look like paint. And if your pastel breaks, that's okay, it happens. You may want to have like a clean rag at hand. I'm going to still use the same rag I used for painting this. And you want to make sure that, you don't want to get too smudged. Keep your hand off, kind of lift up your wrist. And you may want to take a break in between doing your iris and your background, and that's okay. As you can see, I'm not covering up the yellow background, but I'm adding to it. And some of my strokes are thicker in other sections. Kind of like tap your pastel down and push the color away. you can think about if you wanted to add any other color to your background, or if you're satisfied with just adding one over the yellow, that's fine. You can really appreciate his process and the work that he did. Okay, I'm almost done with the background. And you want to feel the movement of your strokes. And make sure you have some kind of paper underneath so that you don't get oil pastel on your background. I mean, on your surface that you're working on. Okay, so we're gonna leave that for now. I always like to put my pastels away while I'm working so that everything's organized. And now I'm gonna pick some colors and for the iris. So I'm choosing like a light, dark, and a white for the iris. So I'm going to, and let's see, an even darker one. So I'm gonna start adding some strokes. Now, what you could do is put a rag underneath the palm of your hand as you're working so that you don't get, you don't smudge. I'm kind of just adding some of this in some areas. Again, kind of moving my color around. And you want to be able to see the color. You're not hiding the background color, you're just kind of emphasizing it actually. And I'm gonna find like a purple. Go in with a lighter. Now, if you don't see the light, you'll just have to go in with a slightly darker color. You can make your dash lines a little bit longer as you're developing your picture. It does look like a painting though. And you want to have some thickness to your pastel, so pressing a little bit harder actually makes it really nice. I'm going to add some white. And that's really coming nicely. Beautiful. Okay, and let's not forget our little blossom over here. And if it's hard to see the color, just simply go in a little bit with a darker color. Now, I'm going to put these aside. I'm pretty happy with how it looks right now. You can always add a little bit more to it, work it a little bit more, and put your colors away. And then find a nice grouping of greens, like a dark green. I've got kind of these greens right now. Let me see, and one more. So at least, if you can, 3 to 4 different colors in the color family. I recommend you still use your cloth to protect your art. And I'm going to use the darker green to bring in my veins, my main vein through the center. I'm going to go over that black line. Okay, and then just put that aside and go in with your lighter. Work this up a little bit. Again, you're not covering your painting, you're adding to it. It's really coming along nicely. I'm happy with how it's looking. And you don't want to forget the strokes that you're using. You want to just stay on that path. And you can always go back in and add some more. Careful where your other hand is. Make sure it's not on your your picture. You want it to be to the side or have a piece of paper under it to protect your art. And you can take breaks if your hand gets tired. And then go back in, but don't forget, try to finish it. All right, and you can develop it a little bit more to your liking. But I'm gonna stop here. And don't forget to put your pastels away. Make sure everything's organized. And for future projects, I like that. It looks really nice. I'm gonna have you guys get some soft pastels. This is just a box of 12. I picked this up at Staples. I think it was $6.99. just for future projects. So it doesn't have to be this brand. You can find it at any art store, and Blix carries them also. And I've seen soft pastels at Target, and all very reasonable. So you don't need a large box of the pastels, but we can definitely use them for future projects. Okay, so thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed this project as much as I did, and I'll see you next week. Thank you.